I'm Corinne Johnson. I'm the founder and public relations director for Utah Parents United, and I'd like to welcome you all to our See My Smile press conference today at the historic Provo Courthouse. We are thrilled to bring the stories of parents who are standing up across the state of Utah to take back their power to unmask children. I am a mother of 5 children, and I am in Davis School District. And I have been pinning my hopes all year on unmasking my children. So many promises were made. The governor, the legislature, our school boards, that as soon as possible, our children be able to breathe freely in school, be able to see their teachers' faces, and they'd be able to see each other's smiles. I was gravely disappointed at the end of the legislative session when I learned that the agreement between the governor and our state legislature that had been arrived at was that the general public would be allowed to choose whether or not they wore a mask starting on April 10th. But our children, those that are at the lowest risk for transmitting and having complications from COVID, would be forced to continue to wear masks all day in school. I realized at that moment that the only person in the state of Utah who had the power to unmask my children was me. I had the rights and I had the power. I watched my children struggle and suffer with medical and emotional conditions wearing masks. And I knew I could no longer allow that to take place. I went to my doctor. We shared with him the medical and emotional conditions that precluded my children from safely wearing a mask at school, and he agreed. I was able to receive mask exemptions for my children. And when my daughter received her pass for her school, I texted her and said, "How do you feel today?" And she replied, "Mom, I feel free." At that moment, I knew that our organization, along with several organizations across the state of Utah, needed to join together to help unmask our children. A coalition was formed and the See My Smile campaign was born. This campaign has reached parents across the entire state into every single school district. Parents are standing up and realizing they are the only ones who can get their children out of a mask. But in order to do so, they need the support of their school boards. School boards in the state of Utah have the power to allow parents to sign medical exemptions for their children. And today we are here to announce that schools and school districts in the state of Utah have granted the parents these rights. And we are asking and pleading for all school districts to follow the lead of those that have done this and offer this option to every parent in the state of Utah. Kane County School District, they are heroes for our children and to parents. And we have the founder of the Franklin Discovery Academy. She and her school are heroes to children and parents in the state of Utah. We have new reports that San Juan School District had a board meeting last night and will allow parent exemptions in their school district as well. They are heroes to the children and parents in the state of Utah. I'd like to introduce a special guest who sits on the board of Utah Parents United, our resident medical expert and doctor, Dr. Lyle Mason, MD. Dr. Mason is a prestigious orthopedic surgeon in Utah. He was the team physician for the Utah Jazz for 36 years. He was a physician for the men's Olympic basketball team in Beijing. He was the physician for the U.S. men's basketball team at the World Championship in Japan. Because of his medical expertise and authority, he was asked by his worldwide church to serve as an area medical advisor over the Caribbean and part of the South America. He is also considered an expert medical witness in legal cases. The data and the science supports unmasking all children in the state of Utah. And we'd like to have Dr. Mason speak to that today.
As a physician, looking at this topic of whether or not children in school should wear masks, I typically just ask myself simple questions. And the question which I asked myself was, whom are we protecting by having school children wear masks? Let me just talk about a few of the subgroups in our society that I believe are not being protected by children wearing masks in school. First, let's talk about the children themselves. In the 5 to 17 age group, which is exactly the group we're talking about, this is the safest group in society when it comes to COVID-19. The hospitalization rate is 8 per 100,000 confirmed cases. They are in ICUs less than adults, and the death rate is less than 1 per 100,000 confirmed cases. In the state of Utah, we recently had our first pediatric death from COVID. It was reported last week, a boy in the age group 1 to 14. Why that spread, I do not know. But anyway, we don't have any other information about comorbidities or other health problems that may have contributed. But that's the first pediatric death due to COVID in the state of Utah. In the United States, there have been 253 pediatric deaths due to COVID. So when it comes to children who are the safest group, they're the least likely to get the disease, less likely to get real sick, less likely to go to the hospital, less likely to die, they're wearing masks, I do not believe really protects them. I don't believe they need protection. There's been a lot of talk about the teachers and staff at schools, that they need protection. With the advent of the vaccines, which are now available, some priority was given to teachers and staff. And at this point in time, if they choose to do so, school teachers and staff have been or could be vaccinated and immune. In the general population, we're now at about 900,000 vaccinated people, plus there are a number of people who have had the disease and are therefore have natural immunity from the disease. Everyone above the age of 16 is now open to having the vaccine administered. The governor originally in February said by the end of April, everyone who wanted the vaccine would have it. He recently amended that and said, well, maybe it's going to be into May before everybody has it that wants it. But does that group require our protection by masking kids? I would say no, it has nothing to do with it. There is a group of people who are unvaccinated and who choose not to be vaccinated. We're not going to change that, and they are not at risk from children in school. I think we would agree that children are only wearing those masks in school, and they are no risk, no threat to the public at large. Right now, with the mask mandate being rescinded or dropped, adults, for the most part, are out and about without masks. They are much more likely to spread the disease than children, and yet children are the ones that we are masking in school. That makes, to me at least, no sense. Recently, the Utah State Health Department announced that the influenza, is a much greater threat to children in the state of Utah than COVID-19. I want to just go back a little over a year, I guess, to the original announcement that Dr. Fauci made about masks. And I think you'll remember that. I hope you remember it, where he said walking around with a mask on doesn't really do anything, doesn't protect you against anything. Later on, he said, well, I actually lied about that because I didn't want there to be a run on masks. Since he made that second pronouncement, I've had less confidence in anything that he says. You know, the other thing that bothers me a little bit is this 6-foot distance thing. Nobody seems to know where that came from. But you know that was one of the reasons that schools were closed, because they said it was impractical to have 6-foot distancing in schools between the desks. Recent studies in Massachusetts in school children and in Florida have now shown that 3 feet is the same as 6 feet. Had that been really known at the onset, there would have been no reason to close down the schools. In Utah has been kind of an outlier. Our death rate is 0.06% of confirmed cases resulted in death. The World Health Organization predicted a 3.6% death rate. That is, nearly 4 in every 100 people who contracted COVID-19 would die. In the state of Utah, we're at 0.06, a massive difference. Our group is not really pushing for the abolition of masks in schools. We're pushing for choice. We think parents should be able to choose whether or not their children attend school. If they have a health problem that precludes that, they don't want to go to person-to-person school, they should not have to do that. If parents want their children to wear masks in school, they certainly should have that right. But we believe that parents should also have the right to ask that their children not be required to wear masks. And in my opinion, there's no logical, medical, scientific reason why that is not possible. Thank you.
We'd like to introduce Jennifer Berry, the founder of Franklin Discovery Academy. She has an MBA and MS in instructional psychology and technology and 20 years of business experience. She's a mother of 2 children and finds great satisfaction in her role as founder of a charter school that focuses on the principles of Benjamin Franklin in opening the world to children and allowing them to learn freely with the liberty and the agency that our founders inspired.
Hi, good afternoon. I'm Jennifer Berry and the founder of Franklin Discovery Academy. The mask mandate allows schools to choose to let parents make medical decisions about masks for their children, and we chose to let them. Let me make clear that we follow the mandate. The right of schools to make that choice is there. Let me also make clear that I'm here to share my own opinions and analysis of how that choice worked out, and not to offer an official school position. And let me also make it clear that nobody is trying to minimize the very real pain and suffering experienced by so many because of COVID. I'm not a COVID denier or a conspiracy theorist who thinks COVID is an attempt to microchip us all. Governor Cox, I've got 2 graduate degrees and will graduate later this year with a PhD in the science of how people learn. I'm married to a doctor who takes care of COVID patients in the hospital. We've both had COVID along with our kids, and we're both fully vaccinated. So please don't lump me in with those you've labeled as enemies and science deniers. Please consider what I have to say as someone with valuable experience, a voter, and a constituent. My comments are specific to children in masks and not grown-ups, which is a different issue. Although at our 600-person school, or 600-student school is too small to make any large, scientifically generalized statements, I've learned several important things. First, despite accepting many mask mandate or mask exemption forms, our COVID numbers match that of the surrounding schools in the community. If COVID is up in the community, it's up in our population. If it's down in the community, it's down with us. But most importantly, our school members haven't been getting it at school. The cases of COVID among our school community can almost always be traced to spread within families, like it was in my family's case. We've not had a single case of student to student, student to teacher, or teacher to student school spread. We did have some teachers give it to each other while they were at a meeting, incidentally while they were all masked, but other than that, no school spread. Also quite interesting, the rate of COVID in our students who have stayed at home, doing school at home, is also the same as the rate of COVID in our students that go to school in person. We have operated in person with full hours, Monday through Friday, 7:30 to 5:30, without any school closures since August 3rd. At our school, those who wear masks and those who are on exemptions peacefully coexist without any shaming or bullying. The freedom of parents to make a choice on masks for their children has brought what one parent described as a, quote, miraculously normal school year and a haven of safety during an otherwise chaotic time. As a mom, it was offensive to me that over the summer, you, Governor Cox, as leader of the COVID task response force, masked my children before masking me as an adult. And now that you continue to mask children when it's not required for adults is mind-boggling. Your recent 4-point statement on why it must be is flawed on many levels. First, one of the biggest problems with the K-12 mask mandate is that it targets the wrong population. All of this effort and expense to get kids to mask up has been spent on well children. The focus needs to be on sick children and on sick adults. In years past, when somebody had an infectious disease, they got a quarantine notice put up on their house and were subject to real and significant penalties for breaking quarantine. With COVID, although a business could get fined 10 grand for a well employee not in a mask, there is no penalty for someone with active contagious COVID from going to the grocery store or sending a sick child to school. The right of the state to temporarily remove freedoms if you have an infectious disease is well established in case law. However, the right of the state to remove freedoms from a well person is not. Just because you've done it this year doesn't mean it passes constitutional muster. If the state had spent all of the effort it spent on masking well people on restricting sick people from spreading COVID, this pandemic would be over. Because we had 2 parents send children to school when there was COVID in the household, we learned early on that the focus had to be on sick children and keeping them out of school, and not on well children. And for the most part, our parents have stepped up in a big way. But we had to institute our own policies and penalties for sending sick children to school, or children who should have been in quarantine, since the state did not. In one case, when the parent was asked by the state's contact tracer where the children went to school, the answer was, "I declined to state." This should not have been an option. A big hammer should have come down until they identified the school so we could have taken appropriate action. Instead, we only found out because kids can't keep a secret. Governance is about allocating resources. We can't do it all. In this case, the state, and mistakenly in my view, made a choice to spend its limited resources on well people rather than on protecting sick and high-risk people. At the same time as former Governor Herbert proudly greeted a plane full of expensive PPE for teachers and students, a nurse friend told me about how she was allocated 1 cloth mask per week at her nursing home facility. The state sent us healthcare grade KN95 masks at the same time as nursing home facilities were begging for additional resources, and their residents were actually dying. They were left with inadequate protection that cost many lives. Those people were basically locked up for a year and still weren't protected and died in numbers that, in my view, are criminal. Clearly, the inexcusable death toll in our nursing homes is evidence that masking 5-year-olds did nothing to protect them. A second and huge problem with your 4-point justification of masking children is putting the burden and responsibility of COVID on them. COVID is not a kid problem. It is our problem as adults. I recently heard about a 7-year-old, not from our school, who came home crying because the teacher had told them how their high-risk mother, and that they needed to wear a mask to protect their teacher's high-risk mother. And this poor 7-year-old felt responsible for the health of that teacher's mother and that she could possibly harm or kill her. Putting the burden of COVID on our children is neither ethical or reasonable, and in my view amounts to bullying at the very least and child abuse at the worst. What happens when that teacher's mother gets COVID and dies anyway, or the grandparents in the nursing home die anyway? What do you think that's going to do to that child to feel responsible for those deaths, even though their masking habits had zero impact on the situation? Putting the burden, blame, and responsibility of COVID on our children must stop. This 4-point justification also mentions that if well children are allowed to breathe without a mask, then at-risk children won't be able to attend school. It has been widely acknowledged, even among diehard maskers, that masking does not cure COVID spread. It, at best, can only help. Accordingly, a true high-risk child should not be at school either way. Putting their health in the hands of a 5-year-old and whether they are wearing a mask correctly is not safe for the high-risk student and an unfair burden to the well student. This 4-point justification also has no end in sight. Those same scenarios will be with us in the fall. There will always be those who choose not to get vaccinated. There will always be high-risk children. Are we going to accept masking forever to attempt to limit the spread of germs always? What does science say that would do to developing immune systems? But the politicians love to say, we're just following the science. The science says masks help, so we have to do it. The problem here is in combining two statements, one factual, sort of, one a judgment, and then passing them both off as factual. The second part, that we should wear them, is not fact, it's a judgment. The problem is confusing science data with ethical judgment. Science presents us with facts, and it is up to others to evaluate those facts in the light of context. The context of masks on young children has been missing. Masks are not developmentally appropriate for them. You should see some of the soaking, dirty, filthy, disgusting, germ-filled masks we find on the ground. Don't even get me started about the increase in nose picking. Masks are not safe for them. We had a significant playground neck injury caused by a mask. A child is simply not capable of wearing a mask that in a way that has enough impact on disease spread to counterbalance the rest of the risk-reward equation. A disease specialist is only trained to say what a mitigation measure might or might not do relative to the disease. They are not trained to decide if the risk-reward of masks is morally worth it. They are not trained to evaluate the judgment part of the mask questions. That because masks may help slow the spread, then, and here's the judgment, children must wear them all day long. They are not trained to consider whether doing so reduces their ability to learn, harms the physical development of their ears or speech abilities, puts them at risk for strangulation on the playground, or causes long-term anxiety and trauma. They are not trained on balancing these risks versus reward. The risk-reward equation was supposed to be something we could entrust to our elected leaders, but instead the claws of fear-mongering got the better of you. At first, the fear of COVID was real for all of us. Because my husband treats COVID patients in the hospital, for the first 2 weeks we lived separately, unsure of how safe it was for us to be together. It quickly became apparent this wasn't necessary. And after a year, there is enough data to know without a doubt that children are not at high risk from COVID. My COVID doctor husband does not let his children go to school in masks. I do, at the very least, give our state credit for letting us be open. Unlike, I think, the power pretty diabolically used in other states to keep schools closed this entire last year. However, if we follow the money, the teachers' union has all the power over Governor Cox on this issue. Are you, Governor Cox, going to continue letting them decide what is best for my children and your children? Are we going to continue letting the fear and burden of COVID wreak havoc on normalcy for our children? But we hear a lot of, well, there's only 6 weeks left of the school year. They've done it all year long. They can finish it out. It is never too late to stop and do the right thing. It's never too late to choose freedom over fear. I'm also deeply concerned about the equivocation coming from the top and the excuses that are currently being used to continue masking children, because those excuses will lead to masking next school year. Nobody is saying we should be irresponsible and do nothing to mitigate spread. Nobody is saying the life of the high risk is unimportant. We are saying it is past time for the burden of COVID to be removed from our children. We do not need to prolong the agony on our students any longer. School leaders, you can take a stand and give parents medical freedom. Governor Cox, it is time to take a stand and let our children breathe. I dare you.
I want to introduce some special guests who have come today all the way from Kane County to share the story of a See My Smile success. And right here with me today, I have Celeste Myers. She's the Kanab City Council member in Kane County. I also have with me Amber Bowman, who's a super mom, and her son, Maddox. And they're going to tell you how they were inspired to take a stand for their rights and the success that they won. Celeste.
Thank you. I'm very honored to be here today with you all to share this wonderful news. As an elected official, I get a lot of practice with confrontation and speaking my mind, and it gets easier with every time. But I'll never forget that there really is a dichotomy between terror and determination when we're speaking in front of people and in tense situations. And that's why my hat is truly off to these parents. They're not used to constantly having to deal with the press or authority figures, and they're the real heroes here. They looked at their fear and they looked at their determination, and they decided they were going to push through and they were going to bring about a beneficial result, and that's exactly what's happened in Kane County. So after just 2 days of parents advocating with support from the See My Smile campaign, the Kane County School District then made an announcement that they would be honoring parental exemption forms signed by the parent, not requiring a doctor's signature. And as we all know, it's quite difficult to get a doctor's signature on these exemption forms, as physicians are also being pressured strongly to not sign forms. So this was huge for us. We are very, very proud.
Without a mask.
Awesome. So, Maddox, do you have any advice you want to give other kids who know that wearing a mask isn't good for them? What would you tell them to do?
Just to stay strong, I guess, and don't be afraid to do it.
Thank you. When we talk about courage and standing up for something we know is right, we look to those that we trust in our lives. And for our children, those people are their parents. And I applaud parents who are teaching their children that their rights matter, and how they feel and what they think and what they do is in their powers, and they have rights to that. Those are integral rights, God-given rights that are protected by our state constitution, and those rights need to be honored by our school boards and our legislatures and our governor, Governor Cox. Our USBE has power as well to make statements supporting unmasking of children. And I'd like to introduce Jenny Earl, a member of the USBE, to share her thoughts on the responsibilities of educators and unmasking children in the state of Utah. Jenny Earl.
I just want to say just a couple things. First of all, Jenny Earl, I represent District 1 on the Utah State Board of Education, and I'm not speaking on behalf of the board. I just want to be clear on that. I'm speaking about experiences I've had throughout this last year. So just a couple of thoughts come to mind. I've gone to a lot of districts. I've visited a lot of schools this year. I was curious exactly how, what we did during the summer. And let me just explain what we did during the summer. The state board put in a framework and allowed districts to make the key decisions to what needed to happen in their districts. We felt that that was very important. I wanted to see how it was rolling out in our schools. Every school approached it a little differently. Some with their, in their lunchrooms, they had to make different types of accommodations based on the student numbers, based on the size and the population. And so as I visited these schools, one thing they said for sure was, thank you for letting us open up. They were so grateful. Around the nation, we have schools closed down everywhere. But in Utah, we did it. We allowed local districts to make those decisions, and they did it well. They did a great job. Yeah. And our teachers are doing a phenomenal job. What I'm speaking to today is the concern that even as we move into the fall, that we need to honor our local districts in their decisions. They should not feel compelled or forced into the decisions they're making for our families and our children and for our educators. And that also with that our parents need to be honored and respected. One thing's for sure, I have gotten so many emails about the masks. Everybody has their research, right? And they come in one hand and say, you've got to wear masks. And on the other hand, they come and say, you can't wear masks. And they all have a compelling argument on behalf of their children. And so, as a young mom, just a quick experience here, I had a child that had leukemia. And so for a period of several years, we made choices on masks. We made choices on where we went, what we did, how we did things. And it was important that I knew exactly where my child's health was. I knew how to engage with others. This is what we need to be doing. We need to allow our educators and our parents to make these key decisions. As we move into the fall, like I said before, I have a concern that we will be pushed into a mandating of an immunization or a mandating of a continuation of things that have gone on this year. And we've got to ask, at what point are we out of an emergency, and do we allow individual citizens to make those decisions? Many parents will make a decision on one hand to continue or to do the immunizations. Others will not. And I think districts are capable and competent to make the decisions on how they will address those issues in their local districts and with their local boards. And anyways, those are my comments. I'm grateful for this opportunity. I'm grateful for the opportunity I have to represent citizens in Utah, and I'm grateful for the voices, the educators, as well as those that have reached out to me, and we've been able to carry on dialogue, so thank you.
That concludes our See My Smile press conference. I'd like to thank the press and for all of those that spoke today. And we encourage everyone to continue to take a stand for their rights here in the state of Utah. Thank you.